Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe. Please note that these green texts come from articles about UFO phenomena that took place in Puerto Rico. The links of these articles are in the archive thread linked in the description. This thread is over 7 years old, so several of these links may be dead. Now, onto the show.
In this thread we discuss paranormal places that shit happen and suddenly the army is everywhere. I'm from Puerto Rico and we have El Yunque, which is a rainforest, and there are always UFO sightings and allegedly alien visitations. I even have a story of a relative from my mother's part. The person told us that she and another group of friends went to one of the big natural waterfalls in El Yunque, and they stayed past 6 p.m., which was when the rainforest would close. They were having fun, cooking food and whatever, when suddenly there was mist everywhere, and the water started to glow a faint blue, and then one of the kids started to cry and point at some kind of humanoid figure that was just standing at the top side of the waterfall, right where the water would fall. And then they saw a huge blinding light and felt extreme heat. After this, in less than 2 minutes the army was everywhere with masks equipped and shit and fully armed. The person told us that the army personnel told them to remain silent, and that their lives would be in danger if they took pictures or even mentioned the event. Some pretty bizarre shit. I've even visited said waterfall and there are closed roads everywhere which are marked with "do not cross beyond this part." Apparently Puerto Rico has a lot more paranormal stories which are mainly never mentioned into the media. Some fun shit.
According to the Puerto Rican newspaper El Vocero, flying discs were sighted by several eyewitnesses during late April 1997. People living in the Playa section of Anasco, PR, reported the presence of strange flying objects over Anasco's skies. Although some of the residents declined to be identified out of fear of being laughed at, they stated that the flying discs crossed the sky in a south-north direction. A worker at a filling station located near State Highway 2 explained that one of the objects was circular in shape, extremely shiny, and moved at a prodigious rate of speed. It stood still for a moment, and 6 more lights came out of that thing. They flew off in different directions, noted the witness. Following this, he explained, the strange flying discs fell into formation and returned to the larger object. They flew 2 by 2 and re-entered the large light, he indicated. This version was confirmed by an Anasco farmer, who claimed having seen the strange lights as he traveled along State Highway No. 2 from Mayagüez to this community, Anasco. Article from Puerto Rican newspaper El Vocero, April 26, 1997. UFO traffic jam in skies over Anasco, by Julio Victor Ramirez. Fucking people stopping to look, they even turned off their cars to just, fuck it, I would had done the same.
In February 1988, a group of persons and neighbors, residents of this area, heard a loud, strange, whistle sound. When they ran to see what it was, they saw a huge UFO. The description that they gave of this UFO was that it was approximately 75 meters diameter, round, and the color of its metal construction seemed to be white-gray, and it emitted green, blue and white bright lights. The witnesses of such an extraordinary event keep track of the UFO, and saw how it impacted and crashed against a mountain, causing a great explosion. The explosion was of such great magnitude that these witnesses state that the same must have been heard miles away. At dawn the next day there were helicopters overflying the place where the UFO incident occurred. Governmental militant personnel were rapidly stationed at the place, seeing that all investigation and information was to be kept top secret. This incident was videotaped the next morning by a local news television station. When the moment came to transmit the videotape on the television news, there was abrupt silence. The personnel from the news station informed the public that the videotape had mysteriously disappeared. During the following months, curious spectators, who surround the place, carefully observed that the land where the UFO had crashed was arid, and the vegetation ceased growing. This incident is well known by the UFO investigators here in Puerto Rico. More recently, a governmental document, denying all information in relation to this incident, was published. The sole purpose of such article was to confuse the general public as to whether what had been reported of this UFO incident really occurred or rather was just simply false information. Also, its purpose was to ridicule the witnesses who testified about what they saw. But ironically, as life can sometimes be, this same document came from the Civil Defense State Agency offices of Puerto Rico, where its director, Colonel Jose M. Nola, also forwarded an official guideline to his agency with specific instructions on how to proceed to investigate this phenomenon. Also, Colonel Nola has been known for many years to be the connection between Puerto Rico and the Civil Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States, which is the parallel Central Intelligence Agency as to a militant level. This one sounds familiar to a case that happened near me about 8 years ago.
Location: Hatillo, Puerto Rico. Date: April 22, 2007. Time: 1400. A computer engineer and his wife were on their way to shop at a women's clothing store in the Centro Comercial Plaza del Norte. As they arrived at the entrance to the store, they observed, sitting one on each side of the main entrance, and in yoga-like postures, two strange characters or entities which made the hair on their heads stand up on end. The two characters were males, very tall, with extremely pale skin, almost the color of paper, expressionless facial features and long completely white straight hair. They both wore a sort of cream-colored tunic, similar to a chef's robe. Their skin appeared unnatural, almost like those of wax figures. Their facial features were also unnatural, appearing somewhat flattened. The two witnesses were so taken aback that they had to stop in order to stare at the strangers. At this point the strangers seemed to notice the witnesses, and appeared somewhat surprised and afraid. One of them briefly looked at the other one as if saying, "They spotted us." The witnesses thought that the strange pair belonged to some type of religious sect, and immediately walked inside the store, where they spoke to one of the employees and made sure that the two strangers were not part of some type of product promotion. The employee, accompanied by the two witnesses, quickly walked out the store, but the two strangers had already vanished. According to the witnesses, only about 20 seconds had transpired. According to the employee, about 30 other customers had inquired as to the nature of the two strangers sitting at the entrance to the store, and had described almost the exact same features. The witnesses further described the strangers as having completely unnatural skin tone, almost translucent in nature, like those of shrimp. Their face was human-like, with large expressionless eyes and somewhat flattened cheeks. The witnesses also remarked that at the same time that they had seen the strangers, there had been other customers entering the store, and these had apparently ignored the strangers or had not seen them at all. This one always intrigued me, could be a way elaborated hoax by some youngsters, fun shit nonetheless.
More Yunque stuff. Location: El Yunque, Puerto Rico. Date: late February 1991. Time: 1930. Freddy Gonzalez, his wife and their young child were taking a drive around the rainforest area on Route 191. After cruising the area, the road took a turn and the pair inadvertently took a detour deep into the forest. After a while they came up to a camouflage gate deeper into the forest, and after inspecting it, they decided to drive through it. As they drove on the path in the woods, they noticed that it was well lit by blue light bulbs on each side of the road. They drove through some hills for about 2 miles when the road abruptly ended. At its end, there was a large metal gate and a building-like structure on the other side of it. At that moment 2 6-foot-tall man-like figures appeared, and ordered the pair to stop and asked who they were. The men wore tight-fitting black one-piece suits, resembling divers' outfits, a wide black belt, black gloves, and large black boots with gold-colored metallic straps. They also wore large dark oval-shaped helmets with dark visors. Their faces were not visible. In eerie metallic electronic-sounding voices, the strangers ordered the witnesses to step out of the car. The child remained sleeping in the back seat. One of the men took a long thin metallic tube with a mirror-like tip and seemed to examine the vehicle. The figures asked the witnesses how they got there and then looked at the sleeping child inside. They then held a short conversation in a grave guttural language resembling German. One of the men then left the area, and a blue pickup truck now arrived at the scene. 2 men wearing blue coveralls were in the vehicle, and spoke in Spanish to the witnesses, again asking them how they got there. The men then looked at the child, and commented something in a low tone of voice to the strange figure in black that remained on the scene. At that moment, Freddy noticed a glint of light coming from what appeared to be a rectangular-shaped, hollowed-out area in the nearby wooded slope of a hill. There appeared to be several huge glass-like doors, and inside there was a disc-shaped object that was encircled in rectangular-shaped windows and was 30 feet in diameter. It appeared metallic and aluminum in color. Thinking that he was seeing something he was not supposed to see, he quickly averted his gaze. The men did not appear to notice that Freddy had seen anything. The men in the blue pickup then ordered the couple and their child to follow them out of the area in their vehicle. They were quickly escorted out onto the main road.
On November 10, 2005, at approximately 3 a.m., my daughter and I heard a weird humming sound like a hurricane wind going by my house. The sound was so strange that penetrated our ears. When my daughter and I looked outside, we observed what appeared to be a disc-shaped object moving westward, towards the rear of the house where an enormous rainforest and a huge antenna are located and which leads all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. The disc was silver in color with a row of windows around it, and had a greenish haze or aura covering the craft. All the windows appeared to be a darker greenish color. The craft appeared to be descending as though it was about to land somewhere behind the house. Almost exactly 2 years ago, on Friday, April 28, 2006, at approximately 3 a.m., I heard again the same sound going by my house. At about 10 or 15 minutes later, I heard my dog, Dora, barking continuously in my backyard. When I went to investigate by turning on the backyard light, the light in the house was off, and by looking through my dining room window, I observed my dog lying on her back with her 4 legs up, apparently unconscious. The dog was chained to a metal pole next to the back fence which separates my property with the rainforest in the back. I called her name, Dora, Dora, what's wrong Dora, but she did not respond. When I lifted my eyes and looked at the back fence, which is about 25 feet from where I was standing, I observed 2 creatures, extraterrestrials, standing close to and behind the chain link fence looking at me. One of the aliens was about 3 feet from the dog and the other alien was about 5 feet away from the other alien. They were about 3.5 feet tall with a large oval head, and big black slanted eyes. They had pale grayish skin and a barely visible slit for a mouth and 2 little holes for a nose. They also had very skinny arms and they seemed not to have any clothes on.
About 1 a.m. he said, a group of the soldiers went down in a jeep to Palmer, a sector at the foothills of El Yunque, in 65th Infantry Road, to get some cigarettes and other things in a gas station, said the officer. When they arrived to La Coca Waterfall sector, down in Road 191, the men heard some strange noises in the brush which sounded like heavy footsteps on the dry leaves and branches in the forest. They stopped their jeep, got off it and checked the area in order to see who was there. Remember, they were there in a secret mission and no one was supposed to know about our presence in the forest. When they stopped, the jeep went dead. The lights, the jeep's engine, the radio communicator, everything went dead. Their watches wouldn't work anymore, even quartz watches. In about half an hour El Yunque was full of military personnel. They were everywhere, and the area was declared off limits and under U.S. military control. At about 2 o'clock to 3 a.m. a lot of people from Roosevelt Roads Naval Station arrived, and with them came an unknown group of men in U.S. Navy marked vehicles. They all were dressed up in white one-piece anti-contamination suits with masks. Only their eyes could be seen, through crystal openings. The type of clothing you use to prevent radiation or bacterial contamination. These people with the suits entered the forest with what seemed to be detectors of some sort, doing an extensive search in the perimeter, that was extended to the slope that descends to the west from the antennas sector in the summit of El Yunque and towards El Verde. I heard these men had found a trail of a strange green luminescent liquid substance on the ground and leaves, following it to an undisclosed place, where they found something. Later on, the soldiers involved with the incident were ordered to board one of the trucks and go immediately to Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, in Ceiba. Once there, they all were submitted to psychological tests, a rigorous medical exam and an intense debriefing session about the incident in El Yunque. Their weapons, equipment and all their clothing were analyzed and then destroyed, burned. In the morning, they received new orders and classified instructions, and they all were told that from that moment on they were out of active duty and of any military service, that they should continue with their civilian lives as if nothing had ever happened and that they could not talk to anyone ever, under no circumstances, about what happened that night in the forest. I was informed on this due to my involvement with the work being done in the forest when this happened and because of my rank and security clearance, and added, it would be impossible at this moment to obtain any verification of this incident from the soldiers' military records, through the Freedom of Information Act because their records were placed under a high security classification and there's no possible access to them. What's more, he said, at this moment there's no mention in their records of their ever having been involved with any special forces unit. Their records were altered so this wouldn't show up either. Finally, and to my surprise, with a grim and worried look he said, "Look, I know you are going to ask me, and I'm telling you. Yes, there's official contact between aliens and the US government. In Puerto Rico, everything is controlled to the highest level by a military and security elite group related to the CIA, the US Army, the Air Force, the Navy and several security and intelligence agencies are involved in this, especially elite corps from the CIA. Well, that last part right there, fucking Puerto Rico, I have a wood rights besides where I live and it scares me shitless, when I go out of my house at night and just stare at it."
In the last months of the year 1992, a strong disinformation program was set forth by Mr. Aníbal Roman, the director of the Mayagüez Area Civil Defense Agency Office, and Police Lieutenant Rodriguez, from the Lajas Police Headquarters, using all the Puerto Rican TV, radio and press media in order to show as lies and fabrications the reports by the witnesses and investigators about the UFOs and aliens seen in the area and ridicule the situation. This together with officers from the U.S. Wildlife and Fishing Service, such as Mr. Fred Schaffner. As this was being done by Roman, his supervisor, Colonel Jose A.M. Nola, director of the Puerto Rico Civil Defense State Agency, sent an internal directive order to all the regional offices in PR stating the guidelines for a secret investigation on the UFO situation in the island, by the Civil Defense Agency and stating in the memo, that the situation pertaining to the UFOs and USOs sightings in Puerto Rico was real and important. Copy of that directive was given to us by a source within the Civil Defense Agency. The source explained the findings, even after stating they were the responsibility of the agency, were really for analysis by the U.S. Defense Department and the U.S. Air Force. In that way, this military agencies would not be seen as officially involved with the UFO investigation.
People parked outside my store were scared, apprehensive, Miguel began. They told me about these little creatures they'd seen. I didn't believe them and began joking with them. But then I saw the creatures too. There were 5 creatures, small, big-headed with big, pointy ears, like in the sketch, 3 fingers on their hands and 3 toes on their feet. I don't know if they were dressed or not because everything was gray. The 5 beings were walking down the road away from the store. I began following them, Miguel said. They were walking along the road. 3 were about 4 feet tall and the others about 3 feet tall. I began following them and all of a sudden they turned around facing me. And that's when I heard this fast-talking, babbling sound, a high-pitched jargon. Their eyes were very bright, and the creatures became enveloped by a very bright ball of light, like soldering light. That light was more powerful than a car's headlights. He got the impression they were very irritated with him, and he felt threatened. It was almost a warning to leave us alone, Miguel said. I was a little scared. So, I backed up and pulled away from them. They turned back and began walking away from me again. I began following them again and that's when they came to this point in the bushes next to the bridge, and jumped down into the stream and disappeared toward the lagoon. The lagoon, called Laguna Cartagena, is to the east and not far from the Sierra Bermejo mountain range, an area where a lot of UFO sightings had been reported. The bridge is about a mile from the store. Miguel said that when the creatures turned back around after warning him away, the glow of light surrounding them disappeared.
The first of these 2 cases was the one when, at 5 p.m. one evening in August 1992, near the junction with Highway number 191, close to the Colinas del Yunque housing settlement, a number of people, adults and children, encountered 2 humanoid beings about 4 feet high, calmly walking along the road. Senora Soraya Collazo, and her 3 sons, Saudi, Didier, and Gabriel, and a daughter, all testified to the encounter. Moreover, these 4 children, plus several of their friends and playmates, actually followed the 2 entities on their bicycles, for quite a few minutes. Then, finally, the little humanoids turned off the road into the thick woodland and vanished, and the children broke off their pursuit and turned back. We interviewed Senora Collazo and all of her children, each one separately. They all stated that the entities had grayish-green colored skin, rather large heads, dark almond-shaped eyes rather deeply set, and noses that were scarcely detectable. Their mouths were thin slits, without lips, and, just like the thing in the photo taken by Ruiz and Berrios, their hair looked as though light brown creamy colored, and swept upwards, as in what is called the punk hair do. The second other earlier case, which we will now describe, was that of 2 policemen and their wives, who also met 2 entities. It was during the last days of February 1991, and at about 3:00 o'clock in the early morning, just by the car park next to the Forestry Services booth where they sell souvenir photos and maps of the Yunque. This booth stands just in front of the swimming pool beside the 191 highway. Of the police party, we interviewed Officer Luis Torres and his wife Margarita, who live at San Isidro, in the municipal area of Canavanas. They had been with a group of friends, visiting the Yunque, and at 3 a.m. as stated, they were astounded to see 2 extraordinarily strange beings a short distance from them, walking down the main road. They described the entities as about 3.5 feet high, with big heads and huge dark eyes, slender in build, and with long arms. They were dressed in what looked like ninja-type costumes, as they are called in Puerto Rico. That is to say, like leotards, such as are used in exercises and gymnastics. Senior Torres said these garments covered the entire body except for the face and the hands. And to think I went to this exact swimming pool like 5 months ago. It's all abandoned now, but it's still part of the rainforest, but fuck damn, makes me shiver. Also, they look to be having fun.
Got some Chupacabra stuff. A Puerto Rican police officer shoots the Chupacabras. In mid-September 1995, at the height of the Chupacabra scare, Puerto Rican police officer, Juan Collazo Vasquez, of the Canavanas Police Department was asleep at his house in the community of Campo Rico. He had retired early, as he had to be up at 4 a.m. the following day. At 11:10 p.m. 23:10 hours, the sound of his car's burglar alarm awoke him. The officer recounts the following: I put on a t-shirt, grabbed my bulletproof vest and my .357 Smith & Wesson Magnum, and went downstairs. When I got to the garage, I saw my chow dog struggling to get away from something. As a precaution, I didn't turn on the light, so there was only some ambient light from the moon. I got to within 9 feet away, and saw this animal. It held the dog by its short arms, and was trying to spike it in the neck with something. My chow is an aggressive dog and quite large. I assumed at first that it was another dog, but then I noticed that it looked something like a kangaroo, with an oval-shaped snout. It was about 3 feet in height. I tried to approach, but I never saw anything like it. It had oval-shaped eyes, from the side views at first. And then, I went into shock. The Chupacabras is shot. I pulled back, then pulled out my gun to aim at the creature and fired 1 shot. I can never forget it. The creature kind of squealed, and reacted. It became like a ball of hair, to protect itself. I used a hollow point, split-end, dum-dum, bullet. I realized the bullet went into it, but did not exit it. That's amazing. My car was on the other side of the creature, and there was no impact point. The creature was sort of catapulted on the wall, and then it springs back up again. I was so shocked. I scraped my knees running away, and up the outside stairs. My wife started to come downstairs. She thought I'd been shot. I grabbed her hair and ran back with her into the house. I was shaking all over. I couldn't believe what I saw. My wife started slapping me and asking what happened. On coming out of my shock, we returned downstairs. We found blood and hair, very thick hair, which the forensic section of the police examined. It smelled terrible, like rotted blood. The next day, the blood on the garage floor was still liquefied. It should have coagulated by then. It rinsed away really quick, but it had this horrible smell. The dog was traumatized. The Chupacabras had sort of shaved off the area it wanted to pierce, but it didn't actually do that. Afterwards, the dog began to shake and seem ill. When he bit my son in the back, we decided to take him to the animal refuge. When he was asked how the chupacabras left, he replied, "I didn't stay to see that." He stated that it left tracks in the mud, 3 big toes, outside the house. No known species, blood sample from the Colazo chupacabras incident were taken away by the police forensic specialists. The sample of the blood and other associated materials from a chupacabras which had been injured in the area 2 nights, later were collected and analyzed by doctors specializing in genetics. Fearing professional repercussions, the doctors insisted on anonymity. Although the original analysis indicated that the sample showed similar characteristics to the blood of human type ARH positive, later analysis ruled this out. It showed that the ratios of traces of magnesium, phosphorus, calcium and potassium, as well as the proportion of albumin to globulin, were not compatible with either human or known terrestrial animal species. Conclusion: new species of terrestrial and aquatic creatures are discovered occasionally. Could the chupacabras be indigenous to Earth? I do not believe this to be the case. In addition to the remarkable results from the blood sample, the creature's speed and method of flying and of killing its victims is phenomenal. Its description matches no known species. In cases where new terrestrial species are discovered, their genetic heritage is traceable. Which terrestrial creature matches the description of the chupacabras in certain critical features, such as the eyes? However, that description is the most widely reported alien hominid creatures in Puerto Rico and in Latin America. A logical hypothesis, then, is that the chupacabras is an alien creature, perhaps a hybrid, created by an alien species for a purpose we can only guess for the time being.
Norka was an elderly lady living in a truly beautiful home high in the El Yunque rainforest who I met in 2004. I was on the island with a team from the Sci-Fi Channel's Proof Positive series, and my good friend, John Downes, the director of the British-based Centre for Fortean Zoology. As we sat and listened, and as the cameras rolled, Norka told a remarkable story. Although the exact date escaped her, Norka told us that she was driving home one night in 1975 or 1976, when she was both startled and horrified by the shocking sight of a bizarre creature shambling across the road. She described the animal as being approximately 4 feet in height, and having a monkey-like body that was covered in dark brown hair or fur, wings that were a cross between those of a bat and a bird, and glowing eyes that bulged alarmingly from a bat-style visage. Elongated fingers, with sharp, claw-like appendages, that looked like they could inflict serious damage, flicked ominously in Norka's direction. She could only sit and stare as the beast then turned its back on her and rose slowly into the sky. Large bat-like wings, glowing eyes, a 4-foot-tall monster, was a mini Mothman, perhaps, roaming around Puerto Rico some 35 or 36 years ago? Mist-shrouded El Yunque has always been a source of mystery involving paranormal phenomena and more recently, UFOs. Dozens of individuals, largely weekenders and campers, have disappeared inexplicably from this mountain rainforest. A child disappeared while walking down a trail with its parents, and even rescue teams sent to investigate have been swallowed by this deceptive wilderness area. Forestry officials are quick to blame quicksand and unexplored sinkholes as the reasons for these evaporations, even when they occurred in areas far from where any of the aforementioned conditions would be encountered. The following appeared in a privately circulated paper entitled Abductions in El Yunque, Are Aliens Responsible? By Hermes Rivera, 1989. About 10 years ago, some 15 children disappeared in El Yunque while on a school trip. The teacher responsible for the kids committed self-end, because the students were never found. A search team from the U.S., sent to the mountain to try and find the missing youths, ran into a short humanoid creature wandering around the bushes. As soon as the creature realized it had been seen, it ran and disappeared. The search was fruitless, no trace of the creature or of the missing children was ever found. The involvement of Tupamaro revolutionaries was suspected, since they had long before threatened to kidnap children all over the US and Latin America to sell them for money. 2 Italian kids, about 9 years of age, were also reported missing between 1976 and 1978. Their case was put on hold because of their father's involvement with the mafia. The Colon brothers, who used to live on the road that leads to the top of El Yunque where the first UFO landed, were also reported missing without a trace about 25 years ago. Not even well-trained and armed soldiers are immune to whatever force is behind the disappearances. In March 1976, 2 Marines stationed at the Roosevelt Roads naval facility vanished in El Yunque. 10 years later, a man named Angel Bernard and his son had vanished from the same spot, and also in the month of July. The Bernards, father and son, were lost for 4 days after wandering off one of the area's many trails, coming across strange features such as bottomless pits, not normally a feature of the rainforest, pools of quicksand, and the most distressing feature, the skeleton of a hapless, unknown person who never made it out of El Yunque's shroud of mystery. Angel Bernard added another interesting note: while the moment they became lost in the rainforest was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a sudden, abnormal nightfall at that time, a feature that has been observed in high strangeness experiences associated with alien abductions. The elder Bernard encountered a red-eyed, human-looking being surrounded by what he first thought were children, only to see them vanish at lightning speed. Their peals of laughter made him realize that some paranormal force was at work. It prompted him to tell his son that amid their precarious situation, they were also facing forces against which only the deity could ward them. 4 days later, they found themselves on another trail on the far side of El Yunque rainforest, having no idea of how their wandering could have led them to that location. Were these individuals possible victims of alien abduction? Unwilling guests of the elemental forces that traditionally occupy such places? There is no shortage of speculation in this regard.
Puerto Rico, the Caribbean's so-called island of enchantment, lies in one corner of the area that has become known as the Bermuda Triangle, renowned for the disappearances of ships and boats, and for sightings of flying saucers. It is here, in this former U.S. colony, whose politics and defense are still inextricably bound up with America, that much of my research into the UFO phenomenon has focused. A great deal of the strange activity around the island has centered on the 28,000 acres of mountainous rainforest known as El Yunque, on the northeastern coast. Jose Orlando Golas, who works for the Puerto Rican government, lives close to El Yunque. Many people have seen UFOs flying over the water close to the surface, he told me. Once, at 1 a.m., we saw one with many colored lights flying next to the sea just over the surface. At first we thought it was a boat. It seemed to be dark underneath and had lights, mostly red and blue at another, upper level. Then it angled and moved upwards. It made a humming sound, and seemed to head in the direction of El Yunque. Felix Rivera is a diver with an underwater salvage company based near the American Naval Air Station which adjoins El Yunque, one of many U.S. bases on the island. He confirmed to me that UFOs and USOs have frequently been observed, often by American military personnel. Navy SEALs, America's elite special forces, have seen USOs here, he revealed. Some have told me that these things will often come up close to boats, then shoot off. They move too fast underwater to be ours. So, 3 major inexplicable phenomenon area in Puerto Rico are El Yunque, Vieques, and Laguna Cartagena. Keep that in mind if you want to visit here.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.